What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 359. My name is Marshall. I am one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado. That's right. You are home again.
You learned your lesson about guessing whether it was sunny or not, too.
It's Luis Scott-Vargas.
Yeah, hooray. It's moving towards winter, so I actually have to, put on pants and a jacket every morning. It's kind of brutal.
That's horrifically annoying.
It is very sunny still. So
yeah, it actually was like that here too. Although I did just get home from Hawaii this morning at about 5 a.m. I took the red eye back, and I have to say it was pretty tough to leave. I really, really, really love Hawaii, and I'm a big warm weather fan. And living in Seattle, it's pretty mild here, but it was a little rough to come off the airplane and just see it dumping rain and 50 degrees out and all that kind of thing. But anyway, back home, safe and sound, and ready to jump on an airplane again tomorrow, where you and I will be going to GP Providence, the road life for both Luis and I. But I'm definitely looking forward to covering that event as well. So for this show, we've got a couple of things that we want to cover, a little bit of a mismatch. We've got some survey results. That's right. We did another survey we mentioned on the show last time, and we've got a good little sample size in from you. Thank you so much for everybody who filled it in. I do appreciate that. And we've got some results to go over. We're going to talk about it a little bit. We've also got a level up on splashing. So we're going to go into the idea of splashing. We're going to kind of relate it to Kaladesh, but it'll also be a more broad strokes version level up style on splashing different colors. And then a couple of quick thoughts at the end about Kaladesh and kind of how the different archetypes have been lining up and things to consider for that as well. Before we get into those topics, though, of course, I want to mention our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com. If you need Kaladesh, you can get it at ChannelFireball. That's right. Singles, you can get sealed product for drafts. And you can even sell your cards back to them if you want. They'll give you a 30% bonus on trade-in to get that Kaladesh stuff in your hand so you can start turning some stuff sideways, attacking, blocking, countering spells, whatever it is you like. They're going to have it at Channel Fireball. You can also find free content. And this is, this is what originally drew me to Channel Fireball was the articles and, subsequently the videos, which you helped pioneer, Luis, the draft videos and such. And I remember I was starting to do draft videos around that time or shortly after as well. And, I remember watching yours way back in the day. You remember the Lorthos video? Yeah, I was around for that. Yeah. And, and I remember just thinking these guys get it. And, that has only grown, over the years since Channel Fireball has existed. And you can find a slew of awesome content from some of the best players in the world, articles, write-ups, tournament reports, all that kind of stuff. And then if you like video, you can watch draft videos, constructed videos, podcasts like this one, all at CFB. Please do check them out. Also, I want to say thank you to our new patrons. We had a nice little run of patrons. I really do appreciate it. Patreon.com is where you can go to support the show directly. That's right. It's a website that lets you give back to the creators that make your life a little bit better. We produce free content, right? LR is free. That's it. If you want to just listen to it every week, hang out with us, that's great. And
not only is it free, I don't get paid.
That is not true. And, but LR.
I thought I just floated.
Yeah, you're just going to throw that out there. But it is free content, but that doesn't mean you can't give back if it's helped enhance your life a little. Maybe you got a little better at Magic, earned a few extra booster packs that you wouldn't have won otherwise. Maybe it just makes you smile every week. Whatever it is, if you want to give back, you can go to patreon.com. You can pick any amount. You can set a monthly cap so that you can stay under any budget you want. And if you do, you get a thank you card in the mail. That's right. Custom made thank you card, by the way. This isn't, from the grocery store here. This one's got some of your favorite. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's got some characters on it. And you get some cool perks too. One of them is that you can submit questions for the question of the week, which we'll be listening to in just a moment. I've got another audio question from our friend Leo Rodriguez. So we'll listen to that in just a minute. But also we do giveaways. That's right. So I've got a couple of giveaways this week. I've been kind of going ham on the giveaways. I've got an LR gift pack. That's a LR deck box with 2 packages of sleeves and a sticker in there. That, for this week, is going to go out to Jacob Hatchett, or would you say Hatchetti? Hachette. Anyway, Jacob from Greenville, South Carolina, thank you so much for your support. And I'll be shipping this off probably early next week for you, as I probably won't have time because I got to go to the airport tomorrow. But
I'm always disappointed because see, I can see the addresses of these people. Don't worry, I won't be reading those on air.
Yeah.
And there's just like that one guy who lived on like Manowar Lane.
Yeah, he
like,
did.
not even joking. Like that was just like literally the. And now I'm always like scanning these for like, does anyone else live on like a really sweet street? And these are all just like mostly the normal.
Pretty normal stuff. Yeah, I remember filling out that envelope, and I was like, "This is just too sweet.
This can't be real." Right?
Yeah. I've also got a bonus giveaway this week. That's right. In my Magic travel, sometimes I accumulate cool Magic-related items, and if you want to check it out, if you are a patron, you can look on the Patreon feed. I put a picture of this. It's sort of a lightweight backpack. It's you get them at some of the tournaments. The Pro Tour has them, and it's good for carrying around Magic stuff. And it's got the Planeswalker logo on it and some other branding stuff on there. It's just a neat little backpack, and I'm going to be sending that to David Kendrick from Plano, Texas. David, thank you as well for your support. I really do appreciate it.
I do have a bonus prize, one I was supposed to bring to Hawaii, but I will bring to Providence. I'm putting it like on my wallet now, so I remember.
This is the Innistrad rares?
It's a mythic
that you
rare,
sold to ChannelFireball.com a long time ago for a profit.
Right. They were not buying these. Essence of the Wild and Mirror of Everbrook, which I opened in the Innistrad Crack-A-Pack, if I do remember.
That's right. Yeah, I'm sure people are just dying to get their hands on those. I will take them from you, though, in Providence. Okay, so that leaves us with our question of the week, because one of the other things you can get by being a patron is you get to submit questions for the question of the week, either in written form or, if you want, in audio form. So let's take a listen to what Leo has for us for our Patreon question of the week.
Hi, guys. My question, I think, might be a little bit subjective, but it does have a lot of relevance. And it's, how do you manage to incorporate luck within the equation? I mean, sometimes you believe that you might be playing very good, but you get unlucky every now and then. And how do you get all that together to actually put out the resource like LSB does consistently? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Leo, for that audio question there. And you heard what he said, Luis. He wants to know about managing luck so that you can get the best long-term results. How do you do that with only good luck on your side?
Well, I'm just curious why you'd ask someone who has clearly no luck. But yeah, you got there ahead of me. I know that's why you wanted to do the intro. So one of the funny things that stood out for the question is Leo was saying, like, how do you manage to like line up, luck with like, skill, and you've had these like really consistent results lately. See, that's the thing is you see this last year where my results were quite good, and you don't really see the 3 years prior where they weren't. Because I mean, Marshall was there; he saw like I had a string of like very bad Pro Tour finishes, and
it was tough on you too.
Oh man, it was, and it all does balance out. Like I think my results over the last 4 years are like something I'm not dissatisfied with in total, but it happened to be like brick, win, all in the same year. So like that's like very clearly demonstrating that things have to line up nicely, and the way you can do that. It's twofold. One is play to your best ability. When you watch someone great, like Owen Turnwald, for example, frequent guest on the show, player of the year this year. When you watch him top deck a Fireball to kill his opponent, and you think like, wow, Owen just got lucky. He was at 1 life and he top decked Fireball. You often are ignoring the fact that maybe he saved a life 6 turns prior, and that gave him that like extra 2 draw steps, and a less skilled player would not have gotten those. So yes, Owen got lucky. But he also set himself up so that he could get luckier. Like he had more opportunities to get lucky than someone worse playing the same game, or someone playing the same game worse. On the flip side, you can play everything perfectly and still lose, and you have to be okay with that. That's like what you have to buy into when you play Magic. And it might sound grim, but I actually think it's one of the best lessons Magic has taught me about just for life, is that life in any aspect in any field is littered with the bodies of people who played perfectly and did not get rewarded.
Oh yeah, totally.
You can look at basically any field, professional, personal, whatever, and people do things correctly and just don't get the breaks. So someone has a great idea for a business, they execute perfectly. It just turns out that for whatever reason, something just doesn't break their way. They get unlucky and they don't succeed. Whereas someone maybe who makes worse decisions succeeds. And what the takeaway for that for Magic is that all you can do is put yourself in the best position to succeed and hope that everything else lines up correctly. Don't get frustrated when it doesn't. Just look at how you can improve yourself. because that's really important. You need to play well when when you lost your last 17 matches if you're doing the right things. Identifying that can be difficult, of course.
Yeah, the thing that really stands out to me about this mentality too is that you have to be willing to take the long-term approach on this, right? A lot of people think of these type of things as sort of the end all, like it's in a vacuum, right? Like somebody top decked on me or whatever. And what actually is happening is that you're trying to maximize your relatively small edge in many cases, in many cases in life and in Magic, over and over and over and over and over again. And that's what equals success. That's the difference between people that think, okay, well, I lost this one match and I run so bad or I'm unlucky or, they start feeling bad for themselves. And people that understand that, yes, that did suck and I lost this match, but the next time I go in, I'm going to take my 2.5, 3, 5, 8% edge against my opponent, and I'm going to put that up against the numbers again, and then again, and then again, and then again, and then again. And over time, it's unbelievable, how big that edge can actually be. It's just very difficult to accept in the short term, because in the short term, almost anything can happen. And unfortunately, most people have to learn this the hard way that, for example, a Magic tournament is the short term. A month is the short term in many cases when you're playing high variance games like Magic can be sometimes. And, I learned these lessons, these very, very tough lessons from poker. And especially before Black Friday, when I was playing on Magic, playing online poker a lot, there was software that would track everything, tracked every single thing that you did. It would just take all the information about all the hands that you played, everything, stakes, tables, results, everything. And it would just spit out all these different reports that you could look at. And, you would start to see these streaks where it would actually tell you even, this is what if you would have ran what we call at expectation, meaning on average, you would have hit this, but this is where you were instead over whatever sample size you decided to choose. And it was incredible. Your actual win rate, could have been minus a few $1,000s when your expected win rate, if everything had played out how it normally would over like a billion hands or whatever, could have been plus a few $1,000s, even though you played perfect. And it can show you right there in black and white that you actually probably played, or at least put yourself in good positions and just happen to not get lucky this time. And of course, the reverse happens as well, where sometimes your graph would show you that you're way above where you would normally be in those situations, and you just had been running good. And, for me, that was a big skill set coming over from poker that I didn't have to relearn. I got to understand that right away. And I have to say that it's a big skill set. And the goal for, I think, anybody is to be able to sort of transcend those emotional feelings and just stay calculated. And that isn't pretending. That's kind of the big difference, is like when I take a mulligan in a game of Magic, like I don't feel anything. Maybe that's a little too strong, but I really, really don't feel it. I just look at it and I just go, okay, mulligan. And then, if I think it's right to mulligan, I look at the next hand and I just go, okay, I'm mulligan. And it just doesn't bother me. I'm just like, yeah, this is just me applying my edge, right? That's all I'm doing. This happens to be the downside of it, but everybody has to do the same things I'm doing. I'm just going to do it slightly better, or at least I hope slightly better. Now, there's other aspects of the game that can get really frustrating that are luck-based, namely like when you keep a perfectly reasonable hand and then just never draw another land, you just don't get to play Magic, right? You just don't get to play the game and apply your edge, and that can be frustrating. But again, I find a lot of comfort in the fact that that happens to everybody. And that's a big, big part of it. I remember I had a big revelation at the poker table once when I was having a bad night. Things weren't going well for me. And I thought I was playing pretty well. I was putting myself in reasonable positions. It's just they weren't working out each time, because my opponents were getting there and I wasn't. And I remember a big moment for me was realizing that when I walked out of there, I was down, right? I had lost money on the night. But I looked around at the table and I saw a lot of players that I thought were not that great. They were kind of medium. And I looked at them and I thought, how much would that person have lost tonight in my seat? How much more would they have lost than I lost? And I looked over at the next person and I just, was just making guesses or whatever. But I thought, well, that guy's a big tilt. He would have tilted off like 5 buy-ins and I lost like half a buy-in or 3/4 of a buy-in.
Look, some of us can build ourselves up without tearing other people down.
But honestly, it is zero-sum. Like, you have to look at the other people around you, at least in this situation.
There's only 8 spots in the top 8. I mean, when you play someone for top 8, only one of you can make it.
Yes, exactly. Right. And so it is like it's the better you do in that position and the worse that they do is more money in poker case, more money for you and less for them and the reverse of that, which is the same equation. So, I think that when I sit there and I'm having to mulligan a lot or miss my land drops a lot, and I'm scraping out whatever percent I can scrape out, I'm looking at it and thinking, if you sub in every Magic player ever in my spot, I'm going to be ahead of most of them. I think, at least that's what my goal is. And I'm really focusing on just trying to get that. Yeah, but I'm just trying to get that, right? Like that's what my goal is. And that just like takes the weight off of it of, like feeling bad for yourself. At least for me, it does.
Yeah, I have a slightly different perspective because, this year I'm not going to experience this because I am doing coverage this year where most of my matches, the stakes I'm playing for are pretty similar among most of my matches. Whereas when you're playing on the Pro Tour, you can literally play a match for $20,000 or play a match for $5,000. And those do feel a little different to me.
Definitely.
But that's not actually that useful. And the mindset that you described, Marshall, is what you should have. We're not saying become, emotionless robots here. We're just saying internalize variance and try to understand what luck does to you. And that's just like if you could get literally just one thing out of this entire podcast and nothing else, I think that would be like probably the most valuable lesson. I'm not even exaggerating.
No, I agree.
The thing people in general are so bad with is identifying luck, the effect it has on your life, and what you can do from there, what you can control and what you can't. Because that's just life. And if you're able to correctly analyze that, make the decisions you need to make, and then not get frustrated when things outside your control make things turn out poorly for you, you'll be so far ahead of people. Not even in a zero-sum way, just in terms of like a happiness way. You're just going to get less frustrated and make better decisions. And that's just all internal. That reflects on you, and that's the perfect mindset, I think. So.
Yeah, I also think that there's a fear that people have that like one thing might derail everything when really it's usually a bunch of much smaller transactions. And I think
that's the other thing is life. Nothing matters individually very much in life.
Right.
Like you might have a pretty terrible day, pretty terrible week, but barring like something incredibly dramatic like a car accident, most of the interactions you're going to have are just blips on the radar. And getting frustrated about things that ultimately don't matter is also really damaging. And you should worry less about failures because the failures just don't matter as much. So we've strayed kind of far.
We have.
But that was a great question.
Really
Leo.
good question, Leo.
I was going to get to which Magic pros I think are above the variance line in terms of their expected results. we just don't have time for it.
But we ran out of time. I see.
So I'm gonna move on.
Okay. Well, how about a crack a pack? This one.
All right. Let's
comes from our friend Marco from Burien. I got a chance to meet Marco actually at a local game start. Thank you for the pack, Marco. I do appreciate it. All right. So let's see. We've got I like this one right off the bat. Thriving Rhino.
Thriving Rhino is great.
Yeah, the card's very good.
I haven't even really settled in. Like most of the time would take Hunt the Week, I think, but Thriving Rhino is competitive with it for sure. And there's some
absolutely.
decks where I would just take Thriving Rhino instead.
Yeah, might just be better. Subtle Strike cards perform quite well. The one creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Another creature gets a +1/+1 counter.
Another great card, though not as good as Thriving Rhino.
Agreed. Kujar Seed Sculptor. I like this card a lot too. That's the one in a green 1/2, and you get to put a +1/+1 counter somewhere when it enters the battlefield.
Something we're going to say a lot this pack. Not as good as Thriving Rhino, but Kujar Seed Sculptor is a solid card. Just a 2-mana 2/3 with upside. Plays well with counters. Good card.
It's a really good card. Yeah,
we've opened 3 +1/+1 counter card.
We have. Here's another 2-mana 2/3 with upside. Sort of. It's Thriving Rats.
I actually dislike Thriving Rats. I have been underwhelmed by the rats. They have not thrived.
Yeah, I think they're fine. I've played plenty of Thriving Rats.
Sure, you'll play the card. It is so much worse than just a 2-mana 2/3 vanilla that I'm like pretty off the card. Just you have to get that attack in and then it's tapped. I don't know.
Night Market Lookout. This is one we'll probably talk about at the end of the show with that little capper. But this is the black 1/1, and whenever it becomes tapped, it drains your opponent for 1. And, this if you're looking to get hyper aggressive, a Night Market Lookout's a good way to do it.
Definitely better than it first looked. The first game I ever played of this format, actually, I played against Matt Nass with 6 of them and 3 Sky Skips. And
really?
He beat the crap out of me. And then during the Pro Tour, actually, Ben Stark had a Night Market Lookout in his deck because he had 2 Sky Skips, and afterwards he's like, yeah, Matt Nass was right. That this card actually just is a real thing when you have vehicles. So
yeah, because you can just continually tap it.
You just keep tapping it, draining your opponent for 1, and if you played on turn 1 and they don't have a 1 or a 2 drop, it does 4 damage total, right?
Yeah.
You just attack them twice. So, yeah, better card than it looks. Still not as good as Thriving Rhino or Subtle Strike or Kujar Seed Sculptor, but worth talking about at the very least.
Agreed. Next is Takedown.
What
do you know about Takedown?
Yeah, I am not a huge fan. It's just...
If it were an instant, would you like it better?
Yes. I think the fact that I think it's an instant might lead to some negative associations, but this is just a sideboard card.
Yeah, it's a straight sideboard. Now we got a little competition here. Glint Sleeve Artisan.
All right, so this is the 2/2 Fabricate 1 for 3 mana common. I do think this is competition with Thriving Rhino.
Yeah.
Because 3-drops are actually premium compared to 4-drops in this format. There's just tons of good 4s and not as many good 3s. I would be inclined to take Thriving Rhino still because I would too. More than White, but I do think that that's a competitive pick.
Yeah, I do too. Accomplished Automaton. No, I'm sorry. Tezzeret's Ambition. Card I'd like having one of in my blue decks, but no need to take it this early. That's the draw 3 for 3 blue, and if you control... if you control an artifact, you get to keep all 3. If you don't, you have to discard 1.
Tezzeret's Ambition is a good part of a kind of like a more controlling based deck, and it at common I think is really important. We called that out just when we first saw the card. Just having this kind of engine at common does mean something, but in general, it's not as good as the more proactive cards to take early, though it is a card you want late.
Yeah, Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot is our last common. This is the black Puzzle Knot, so the draw a card and lose a life Puzzle Knot, and I have seen a lot of these on the battlefield, and it's actually been okay. I think it's fine.
I do think that this card fits well because the black decks want artifacts, but it's not a card I prioritize.
No, not at all. And especially not over these cards we've got. All right, let's get to the uncommons then.
Alrighty.
Here's a good one. Aerial Responder. Right off the bat, that's the 2/3 flying vigilance lifelink for 1 white.
Yeah, I'm in for an Aerial Responder. Vampire Lighthawk is definitely not Vampire Nighthawk.
No.
Death Touch lifelink, because this just gets outclassed sometimes, but it's still a solid first pick.
Yeah, I agree. I like that card a lot. This is a card I'm glad we opened up. It's Incendiary Sabotage, the 2 red instant. As an additional cost to cast it, you sack an artifact and it does 3 damage to each creature. Been really underwhelmed by this card.
I think this card is just crap.
Yeah.
I've tried to play it and I don't think that it works out very often.
Okay.
It just asks too much of you. It asks you to have artifacts that you don't mind sacrificing, so like Puzzle Knots and whatnot, Prophetic Prisms. It asks you to be playing a red controlling deck or a red deck with all high toughness creatures, and those just don't come up all that often. And even when you do, some decks you play against don't even care about this card. So I'm just not in for Incendiary Sabotage.
I'm not either. Also the conditional nature of it. Yeah. Our last uncommon is Durable Handicraft. That's the 1 and a green enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can pay a mana to get a counter on it, and you can pay 6 mana and sack this enchantment to put a +1/+1 counter on all your creatures. Question mark on this one is: do you start it or do you bring it into the board?
Yeah, I still actually don't know where I land on this card because I've seen it played. I've never actually had a deck with it yet, surprisingly, but I've seen it played in a bunch of different decks. Going to the Pro Tour decks, there's a mixed view among my team.
Mm-hmm.
Some people were like, yeah, the card's pretty good. Some people were like, yeah, this card's just not very good. And mostly it was like, in a slow matchup, this card is good in the right deck, but that just is not a ringing endorsement regardless. So
no, but I do think that is accurate. I think that, if you're both just going to be there playing a bunch of creatures and not really attacking that often, then Durable Handicraft does hold its own, but it still isn't a bomb. It's just good enough. And then at any time that they're trying to either go over the top of your strategy, by assembling some engine or some huge mana sink late, they're going to overpower Durable Handicraft in most of those scenarios. And if they're trying to go under you, with the Night Market Lookouts and stuff, then Durable Handicraft is a absolute liability. So you want it out of your deck. So my current stance is that I don't mind having one of these in the sideboard of my green, green-white deck or my curve deck. But I don't start it anymore. I just find it too risky, and the upside's just not quite that high.
Yeah, that's basically where I'm at with it too. I'm not in a hurry to try and play the card. Though if it comes up, I will take it because I'm not my confidence level on this card that I know how good it is low.
Ooh, we got a good one.
Do we?
Oh yeah. How do you pronounce this again? We had a long conversation about this. Yeah. Verdurous?
Verdurous Gearhulk.
Verdurous Gearhulk.
I believe it is Verdurous, though every time we have a pronunciation battle on the show, people send us clips of how to pronounce things. Which, all right, I guess they're incoming. Well, this is very clearly the Windmill Slam. I mean, 3 green, 4/4 trample. When it comes to play, distribute 4 +1/+1 counters among creatures. Like, it's just absurd. Yeah. So you're going to slam Verdurous Gearhulk and move on with your life. I mean, it's just not even close.
Yeah, it's not even close. And I'll remind you that this goes into the little pile I have here for our next giveaway. We give away all the cards to our patrons that we open up on our Cracker Packs, and that Gearhulk is now in the sleeve, as we say. Okay. Let's move on.
You got the sleeve.
Yeah, I got the sleeve. All right. So we've got a couple of things to cover here. I wanted to talk about the survey results. I don't think we need to make it a huge part of the episode, but I did want to touch base with people that had done it.
Yeah, the survey is something we did 2 years ago, and now recently. I think it's good to check in. It's a pretty light survey. Like, we're not... Yeah. This isn't deep market research or whatever, but it is interesting to just at least do a quick pass of, like, what are some of the interesting results we got and kind of what they mean, and maybe how we can figure out ways to guide the show going forward.
Yeah, we had about, at the time of recording, about 2,400 people had taken the survey. We'll start off with the one.
We can throw up the link still, by the way, because we can check. The results keep dynamically updating, and we'll look back, because I think having a rolling survey for a little while at least, so more people can get to it, is good.
Yeah, I like that. I'll put up both links. I'll put up links to the results for people that just want to check it out. But if you'd like to take the survey, I'll also put that link in the show notes as well. The one thing that sparked the most conversation for us over the last survey we had was the gender breakdown of our listenership. And not shockingly, our listenership is still overwhelmingly male at about 95.5%. And then we had 3% female and then 1.5% for other. We did receive some feedback about the other category because, we understand that gender is a complex issue and not everybody is going to see it with the same lens.
It's certainly not binary.
Right. And it's obvious, very clearly not binary. And so we wanted to make sure that there is a group so that we could, recognize that, hey, I don't fit into one of these categories that you've given me. I want to have my own category. But then, we also got some feedback that was like, yeah, but other kind of feels like, I don't know. It doesn't.
We're othering people.
Yeah. But and so they were hoping for like a drop down of some sort. And so, we took that feedback, and when we do the next one, we'll work with Garrett, who helped us do the survey, and who put it together to see if we can come up with an even more granular one. Now, for the purposes of the survey, this is meant to be a big picture snapshot. So we have to be careful about making each question too deep, because then it takes too long. And then we're kind of like, people are like, okay, well, I want to take your survey, but I don't have 20 minutes. I've got 2 minutes or 5 minutes. And so we have to kind of balance things out. But we did hear what you were saying there. And we definitely understand that other may not have really represented how you.
We strive to be inclusive. This was not the best way to do that, so we're gonna make sure that next time we just do our due diligence better. This question was just written. We didn't think much of it, which I think is not a great thing, but we'll do better next time.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, still mostly male.
Yeah.
I expected that at this point. Last time it caught me off guard because I just didn't think it would be that heavily skewed. But after having a lot of discussions in the last 2 years about how things go in Magic and some of the forces behind it and all that kind of stuff, I'm less surprised this time.
Yeah,
I'm still not happy about it.
Less surprised, but yeah, still unhappy. I wish Magic was more inclusive, more welcoming. I wish that. And I wish is kind of weak words, because I would like to do what I can to help, and I think we all should, but it's kind of the same stuff as last time. Just be nice, be inclusive. Don't be a barrier for other people joining the community. And if you see other people doing that, I would highly encourage you to say something. Like, it is your responsibility. It is every single person's responsibility to make sure that this is an inclusive community. And when someone says or does things that aren't, part of it is your job to say something.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I know it's hard. Look, conflict is difficult. We were just talking about this before the show, how, we both are somewhat conflict averse, or can be. And, it's something that I'm trying to work on. And it is definitely something I feel strongly about. So you as the enfranchised Magic player, part of your duties are to make sure that Magic is open and accessible to everyone. So when people are acting contrary to that, I think that you bear part of the responsibility as a member of the community to help mitigate that. So don't start fist fights. That's not what I'm saying. But I've been in game shops, I've been at tournaments, and I might be way more comfortable now doing this than I used to. I understand that, and I'm in a position where it's a lot easier for me. So I should use that, and other people should realize that too. And as part of the in-group, you should do what you can to make sure that the in-group is hopefully at some point no longer a thing.
Right. Moving on. Some kind of big picture stuff that we found interesting. About 80% of our listeners started listening since around 2013.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Which is pretty crazy. Yeah.
I that surprised me. I hadn't really looked. I don't know if we had a question like this at the last survey, but I just didn't realize how many listeners were new. Like I still feel new. I joined at the end of 2014, and I still feel like I'm new to the show. And something like I guess I didn't break down the 2014 numbers, but I think it was something like 60% of the people started listening since 2014. So like there's or 2015 might even be the more accurate. There's a lot of people who I was on the show when they started listening, and I still feel like I just got here.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, totally. And that is a thing that you and I have discussions about when it comes to content, right? Because it's tempting for us to say, well, we did a show about that, a year ago or something like that, and like we don't want to revisit it too soon, but like we do have to make sure that we're kind of beating the drum on how we see things and the ideas that we want to put forth on the show. And, we basically never just straight up repeat topics. Like we always take it in a little bit of a different direction or go a little deeper. And I think that, we need to make sure that we remember that a lot of our listeners are a lot newer than we maybe think they are.
Yeah. I actually think that, we should be more aggressive about, I don't want to say like rerunning old topics, but like revisiting old topics, even if a lot of that revisitation involves saying some of the same things, because they're important things to say. I mean, we have themes, we stick to them, and some of them can be updated well. Like the vanilla test is one that we frequently reference, especially in set reviews. But we even talked about updating it, right? And we talk about how standards are different, and that's just true. Probably true of a lot of the other like core philosophies of LR. That honestly, if it was an episode 5 years ago, a lot of people may not have listened to it or be aware of it, or maybe some are because we talk about it and they go back and listen. And that's great. That people should do that. But I think that we have a little bit more room to go over some of the concepts we find fundamental and important.
Yeah, for sure. About half of our listeners lurk in the LRcast subreddit, but don't necessarily participate that much.
Yeah, I like the subreddit. I do. I put myself in that 50%. I don't participate a ton, but I will read the feedback threads and every now and then comment on things.
Yeah, I just like that there's a place that, because like there was a time when the clans on Magic Online, at least would allow a little more interaction among people. Now they feel very separated out and they don't add a lot of actual functionality other than just kind of saying, hey, you and I have something in common. And I really feel like the subreddit, has done a much better job, in fact, of putting that kind of value out where if you have a question, you can ask it and that there's going to be people there who actually care, right? Who actually like want to help you, not want to make fun of you or ignore your post because they think it's too new. Like people there that are like-minded to how Luis and I are about fostering a community rather than just being there to spout off. And I think that that's like, really a value add, and it's of course free and all that stuff too. So it's just it's its own thing. And I really like that.
And we reference it on the show because that is where we drive people to talk about the show. That is our official forum to talk about the show. I mean, you can always tweet at us on Twitter, and we'll read those tweets and whatnot. But in terms of like actual discussion, the LRcast subreddit, that's the place.
That is it. What about the set reviews? There's some interesting stuff on the set reviews here.
About 20% of people watch the YouTube version. So I don't know what the number of breakdowns are between normal for the normal show. But that seemed higher than I expected. I didn't realize how many people watch the YouTube version, and maybe that's because seeing the cards is important as well.
Yeah, I the reason I did them originally just was because I had a couple of listeners say, "Well, I'm really a visual learner." I mean, I think it's kind of obvious that it's easier to just understand the card if you can just read it in front of you. But, the advantages of a podcast are that you don't have to be sitting in one place to listen to it. So that's why we're careful to read all the cards and try to repeat the names and such for people that are only on audio. But some people are just like, look, when you read the card, it doesn't stick. I can't visualize it. I just have a hard time with that. And, this is the original impetus to make these shows. And it turns out, well, there's a lot of people like that, that just find it much more, it hits a lot harder for them to be able to sit down and watch it, even though you do give up the ability to, mow the lawn while doing it or whatever. But it sounds like it is definitely worth it to keep doing those. And so, yeah, I like those quite a bit.
In terms of consuming the set review, 16% of people listen to one color at a time. 54% listen to it in 2 to 3 large chunks, and then 21% of people listen to the entire show at once. So that's not super surprising.
No, that sounds about what I would expect, right? Like
there's a range. I mean, some people just like slam the 5 hours at once. Other people just divide it per color, and then about half listen to it over a period of a couple listens.
Right, which makes sense. I mean, those shows get pretty long, and there's just sometimes where you just won't have that time because you're on your way somewhere or you got to go to bed or whatever. And so it makes sense to kind of space it out a little bit.
The next one actually surprised me the most. Most people, 63%, like the audio show as one file, but only half like the video show as one file. I actually thought those numbers would be reversed. But it turns out people are generally in favor of keeping the show as one file, especially the audio version.
Yeah, that didn't surprise me just because it gets complicated with podcasts because, depending on how you have your subscription settings set, if it was multiple files, you might only get 1 or 2 of them and the other ones would be in some download queue. And also you have to track those things down, right? It's like, oh, do I have all of them or did I miss one of them or are they all here? Are they all in one spot? It can just get a little bit clunky. But for the video, I do think it makes sense because like that the number's a little bit lower just because you sit down and you are kind of anchored to your screen for a certain amount of time. And if you hit play on the video and it says it's 4 hours and something minutes, you're like, well, I'm not sitting here for 4 hours. I'll just do, maybe it just turns you off to it and you want to click away. Where if it's 40 minutes for one of the colors, you're like, okay, I'll sit down, I'll watch this, and then, I'll move on with my day or whatever. So I'm not shocked that they were a little bit different, but yeah, the numbers are pretty high each as well.
For Magic Online, 25% of people primarily play Magic Online. 51% primarily pay paper, and then 24% are about an even split of Magic Online and paper, which more, the fact that half the people play a good amount of Magic Online is more than I expected.
Yeah, I agree. That's, you and I are both big Magic Online aficionados, but, the fact that our audience is that many people playing on Magic Online definitely, it makes me think about that as in terms of like we could, maybe do another Magic Online episode about, one of our popular ones with Brian Wong was how to go infinite on Magic Online, because that was one of Brian's goals, as a player was to kind of, he managed his account very well, his trading and stuff like that. And, he kind of outlined.
I'm so heinous at that.
That's the problem is that you and I are both really bad at that. I have stories, but anyway, I am not good at selling rares. I let that go too long. But, those are the type of shows that we could also look into and have it not hit a small percentage of our audience. Because the fear with that is if we put out a show that's really just Magic Online specific and you don't play on Magic Online, that week's kind of a pass for you, right? Like you might listen, but you're not going to get anything great out of it. But, when that big of a percent of our audience does it, it makes it more appealing.
I still think with half the people not playing Magic Online, we probably wouldn't do that, but it might be something to look at as like a section.
I still would. I mean, it's
half.
It's half. Like,
That's
what if we?
Audience.
Well, okay, but like here's an example. We talk about like Grand Prix or something. Like half of our audience aren't going to go play a paper tournament. They play on Magic Online, or there's 25% that are just straight up primarily, and then the rest of them aren't. And we talk about that anyway. What percent? Like we talk about big major tournaments or something like that. A lot of our listeners don't go to that, but it's still, something there for them. Anyway, something to consider. player type. This one was kind of interesting. In a spectrum with casual and competitive grinder, competitive beginner, we had 30% listed themselves as a casual player. 55% are competitive beginner, which I think would be, that's kind of our bread and butter, I would guess anyway. And then 15% competitive grinder. So, somebody who's out there really playing a bunch of tournaments, maybe a tournament every weekend or playing on Magic Online a lot. I like that. That to me is kind of the perfect bell curve for what we would want, which is, we want the show to be accessible to people who are a little more casual, meaning that, they draft once every couple of weeks and they enjoy it, but they're not out there trying to like take over the tournament world. But we want them to be able to listen and get something out of the show and not feel like, well, this isn't aimed at me. But of course, the biggest chunk is the competitive beginners, the people who are like, look, I'm on the upswing here. I'm learning. I'm taking in information. I'm trying to improve at this. That's of course the person that we're aiming at the most. But then we still, maintain, 15% for the people that have kind of graduated to that, GP level or whatever, that listen just to sort of get our perspectives on things. And sure, there's some stuff that maybe they've heard before or already have a good understanding on, but they still come to hang out with us. And that to me, I think is a very nice balance right there.
The hosts didn't take this the survey though.
The hosts, I took it.
Did you?
Yeah.
What category did you put yourself in?
I don't remember actually. I don't think I fit in any of those.
Same.
Yeah.
I would say we have a 50-50 split. Actually, it's 100% now. We're both commentators.
Yeah, that's true. It was not one
As
of
the saying
options.
goes, those who can't play commentate.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm really glad that you're on the other side of that coin when you finally drop that, as they always say, or whatever, but I still don't like it.
So co-host is the next one?
No, that's not the next one. No, back up, buddy. So it was also asked, which team are you on? You on Team Shelley, Team Elmer, or Team Harold? What a beating. Team Harold just got trounced with Team Elmer just crushing everything. As it should be.
Team, we can skip this one.
Yeah, he did. But I made sure to put something behind it so that we didn't forget it. I'm sorry, man. You got to start getting on the campaign trail for Harold a little more.
Oh, yeah, I tried, but he's barely beating the I don't know what this is category.
Co-host, I thought this one was kind of interesting. This is the question is
very interesting.
This one is, who do you think, who is your co-host, right? Which is like, who's your favorite? A lot of people though, end up picking the person who hosted the show when they started. And we've seen that was the case. And it certainly is here with you picking up 66%. I don't have the number in front of me, but that's what I recall. A huge chunk of it. And then sort of trailing off as we go further back into the past of co-hosts, which makes sense. There's a lot of turnover with this stuff. And then I also had to give a shout out to the 27 people who said Ryan. That's great. That's Ryan Spain, the original co-host of the show. And one of the people really responsible for setting the foundation of what this show is. And I love it that there's still 27 of you just like Ryan, Team Ryan. I think that's great. I'm also on Team Ryan, by the way. How does that sit with you?
You tend to like the co-host you started with, which I guess in this case for you is Ryan.
That's true. For formats, 91% play draft regularly. 36% said they cube draft regularly. I would assume that the regularly on cube draft is whenever it's up on Magic Online, but hey, I could be wrong. Cube could be that much more popular. Yeah, they do.
There was a time in my Magic playing history where my biggest exposure to Magic was cube drafting about once a week. In paper. So
there you go. Yeah. So a lot of that, and then
a lot of people drafting.
The real thing is the
not
draft.
A surprise.
Yeah, but that's the real thing, right? Because we do try to dedicate an episode per set to Sealed. In fact, it may even be next week's show, depending on how things pan out. But we are a draft centric show in many ways. I mean, we will talk about all limited formats on some level. We'll talk about Two-Headed Giant when it's relevant, but the bulk of our attention really has to go to booster draft, as booster drafting is a gift from the Magic gods, and we don't want to disrespect it. Draft leagues, this was interesting because it's new. 36% said that they would replace all queues with draft leagues. 63% said they'd prefer to have both leagues and regular queues available, which was weird.
1% said only regular queues.
Yes, and this I found this one actually fascinating because I did not expect that 63% number to be that high. I'm kind of done with queues, man. Like, I just don't play them anymore.
Well, I am too. I would never join another draft queue, if there's any way to avoid it. But I don't have a problem with them offering those, because basically the draft leagues have a clearly healthy enough population that they fire fast enough. So if the queues are also firing, having both seems like it will just serve more people.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that is what they should do. I just expected more people to say, I'm kind of over queues. I'm into it. But that is definitely not the case.
People want both. You could make it all draft leagues to force people to make their life better. But
yes, you could. You could do that. One other last note that isn't specific to the podcast. It's more about Magic Online, which, I just thought it was kind of an interesting thing, is that a total of 72% of people said that they were either satisfied or the notch above satisfied on a 5-star scale. So either 3 or 4 stars out of 5, ranging from very unsatisfied to very satisfied. That's a lot of people. The kind of the party line that you'll hear on social media and the like is that Magic Online is just horrifically bad. I've never found it to be that bad. I have many, reservations about the quality, and there are many frustrations with playing it. I'm certainly not the person that's going to stand here and say that it's great, but it does let me draft, and I do play it basically every day, and it works for the most part. There's bugs. Look, I'm not trying to put myself in some camp where I'm defending or not defending Magic Online, but I was kind of happy to see that actually, that, a lot, 72% of the people said, yeah, it works. It's okay. Cause that's how I felt about it myself, even though, like I said, I do have, criticisms as well.
The people who are most disenfranchised by Magic Online are the people who just can't get over the barrier for entry, which is quite high. So I'm not surprised that a more competitive leaning podcast such as ourselves would have a population of people who were able to power through that and learn the interface and play. At which point Magic Online, I think, is a product that definitely meets the needs of its consumers, which is to be able to play Magic Online.
I'm just saying, go on Twitter. These are hardcore Magic Online players, and they'll have you believe that this is just the worst thing that ever happened
Magic
to computing.
Players tend to dramatize things. I guarantee you that 80% of the people complaining play tons of Magic Online, and the other 20% maybe did actually quit, but I would say maybe less than that. I don't know. It is. I think Magic Online does a lot of things great, and I'm not an apologist by any stretch either. I mean, I had the bug where you couldn't sideboard last week, which was terrible. But
right.
I think in terms of getting to play games of Magic Online, it's the best at what it does.
Yep, it is indeed.
Magic Online.
Okay, let's get into the main thrust of the show here. This is going to be a level up on splashing, which is, well, it's a skill that you need to have to be really good at limited, because, well, it's not necessarily your first resort, even though if you talk to a lot of players, you'll see that they splash basically every single draft that they ever do. It is a skill set that when you recognize the times when it's correct to do so, you're going to need to know how to do it, how to recognize that, and what the kind of moving parts are for splashing. So let's get into this.
I believe it says, let's dive in and make a splash. And there's a note. It says, Marshall added that joke.
There's also a sub note, by the way, for the patrons that get the show notes. They'll see that I may
some
have...
notes aren't canon when it comes to show recording. So first of all, let's just to be clear, splashing is playing a third or fourth or fifth color in a otherwise 2-color deck.
Yep.
So an example is you're red-white and you're playing one copy of Unlicensed Disintegration. One red-black, destroy target creature. And they take 3 damage if you have an artifact. So splashing is not playing 3 colors straight up, and it's not playing one color with 2 tiny splashes. It's playing 2 colors and then splashing a third, again, or sometimes fourth or fifth color. So the first step is, when should you splash? Since you actually have to answer that before you decide how to splash. And there are 2 things that lead you to splashing. One's more important than the other. The first is having cards worth splashing.
Yes.
If you don't have those, your fixing doesn't actually change your decision. You're not splashing Windrake in your black-green deck. I don't care if you have 3 Prophetic Prisms and 3 Attune with Ethers. You just shouldn't do that. That's just not a good idea. So the first thing is to make sure you have cards that are worth splashing, and those kind of cards tend to fall into a couple different categories. The first is they're powerful. They have to be a lot more powerful than the average card in your deck. Otherwise, it's not worth going out of your way to play a third color. You're not splashing Windrake. You're splashing cards like Unlicensed Disintegration. Number two is the card needs to be good late, because Voltaic Brawler is a powerful card. This is the red-green 3/2 for 2 that gets 2 energy and when it attacks becomes a 4/3 trample if you spend an energy. That's a great card. Like you'll take that card early. It's just not a good splash card. Playing a 2-mana essentially 4/3 on turn 8, that's just not that impressive. You can just play a 6-mana 6/6 on turn 8.
Right.
So
it's a common you can pick up at any point and not have to splash for it, right?
Right. You're not looking to splash Voltaic Brawler. A Cloud Blazer, on the other hand, the 3 blue-white 2/2 flying, when it comes to play, draw 2 cards, gain 2 life. That card is great on turn 8. It's also great on turn 5 or turn 10. So that is a good splash card. Unlicensed Disintegration, like I mentioned earlier, also good. And it's not a secret that a lot of the cards I'm mentioning are gold, which I'll get to a little bit later. And then cards that you want to splash have single mana requirements. So Unlicensed Disintegration in a red-white deck as a splash. Basically, red is kind of free because you just assume in a normal course of the game you're going to have access to red mana, or otherwise you have other problems. Right. So it basically is just like splashing, like a card that costs one black mana symbol. Similarly, you can just splash a card that costs like 3 and a black, and that's a fine splash. Don't double splash cards. If you're going to try to play a card that costs double black, then at that point you're not splashing, you're doing something else.
Right. And that's a huge trap to fall for newer players as well, is that they think, but this is the best card. It's a Gear Hulk, right? This card's amazing. I've got the black Gear Hulk in my green-white deck or my, white-red deck or whatever, and it would be so awesome. And so they're like, I'm just going to splash it. I'm just going to do it. I just can't not put this card in my deck. It's like, stop. You cannot put that. You can absolutely take the option of not playing that card. It is absolutely correct to leave that card in your sideboard. And you need to give yourself, the wiggle room to do that. Because I know how hard it can be, right? Like you pick it. It's so exciting. You really want to play that card. You know how good it is. You listen to us gush about Noxious Gear Hulk and how amazing it is. And then you're like, I'm going to play. I'm just going to put 4 or 5 swamps in my deck. I'm just going to run it and hope I get there. Don't do that. Have some discipline. You can tell yourself, you know what? I will actually lose more games overall by putting this card and these 5 swamps in my deck than I will win by leaving them out. And that should be your litmus test. If you can't pass that test in your head, then you should not splash that card.
So the second thing when it comes to splashing is fixing. You're going to want some fixing. You're going to want ways to make your mana better, because you don't want to sleeve up 7 plains, 7 mountains, and 3 swamps and just try to play this Unlicensed Disintegration. That does not pass the test of what you mentioned earlier of losing more games than it wins you, or it rather will lose you more games. So fixing is, cards like Prophetic Prism and Evolving Wilds are good colorless ones. In this set, you have Tune with Ether and Wild Wanderer as good green fixing cards. What kinds of fixing you want is you want cards that you would just play anyway. Like you're going to play a Tune with Ether in a 2-color deck. You're going to play Prophetic Prism in most 2-color decks. Wild Wanderer. These are all cards that are fine to play. Evolving Wilds, for example, you're not paying a big cost by playing these cards.
Right.
An example I pulled of something that you wouldn't play normally is like Manalith. This was from M12. This is a 3 casting cost artifact, taps for any color, and that's a good card to help you splash. But you wouldn't just play this in a green-white deck. Like, you wouldn't just put a Manalith in your deck unless it tapped for a 3rd color. So the fact that you're not playing this card normally means you're paying more of a cost. And yeah, maybe it's right to splash something with Manalith, but you are paying a cost to put this card in your deck, whereas you are really not paying a cost to put an Evolving Wilds or a Prophetic Prism in your deck.
Yeah, it's a minimal cost, basically a tap land.
Yeah. One thing that people frequently get wrong is on-color fixing actually does help you splash. So if you're green-blue, Botanical Sanctum, the blue-green land that enters the battlefield tapped if you have 4 or more lands, this is a land that taps for blue and green mana, and you're green-blue. You might think, well, that doesn't help me splash red. But actually it does, because if you have a Botanical Sanctum, you can replace one of your forests or islands with a mountain. You have an extra red source, and you have the same number of blue and green sources. So you actually are more well-equipped to splash a 3rd color if you have 2-color fixing of your 2 primary colors. So it actually goes into about the same bucket. I don't think that you should look at it and say, like, this has different value because it doesn't have your literal splash color. If you're trying to play a 3-color deck, a blue-green land when your blue-green splash red is great. It'll do the thing you need.
Yep.
So you have something good to splash. You have some fixing. What are some good ratios for splashing? The most common one I've found is 3 sources for 1 or 2 splash cards. So this is something like, you know, you're black-white and you want to splash a Welding Sparks and Unlicensed Disintegration. You have like a Prophetic Prism and 2 mountains. And then, you know, like 8 plains, 7 swamps. And so they're like, you're running a little light. You would much rather have 2 prisms. And once you have 2 prisms, then you can go down to like 1 mountain or play 7/7, 8/7/2, and then 2 prisms. Something like that would be great. But even with just 1 prism, you're still at like 9 of one of your colors, 8 of your other color, and then 3 of your splash color. So that is pretty relevant.
You can also see why we were talking about playing the cards later in the game, right? Because if you've only got 3 sources of a specific color, the chance that you have those on turn 1, 2, or 3 isn't necessarily that high. But by the time you've seen another 6 or 7 cards off the top of your library, and we get into turns, 7, 8, 9, 10, now all of a sudden your chances of having seen one of the 3 go up dramatically, and that hopefully lines up with about the time when you want to cast that spell.
Yeah, and yes, you would love to have 4. You would love to be playing a green deck and have like a Wild Wander, 2 Attune with Either, and a Prophetic Prism, and just play 1 Swamp and have access to 5 black sources. But you don't always end up in that situation. When you're splashing a 3rd or even 4th card, you're going to need more than 3 sources. You probably want like 4 or 5 sources. Once you're past 4 splash cards, you're not actually splashing anymore. You're just 3 colors, which in this format can happen. The deck with 5 or 6 mana fixers can just play base green and play blue and black and be fine. But in general, a splash really does mean 1 to 2 cards. That is the most common usage. And going to some format specific stuff, you're just going to see splashing more often in this format than in others because it has a bunch of powerful gold cards. The gold cards I mentioned earlier, they're just a bunch of uncommons with high power level that are good in the late game and have single mana requirements once you're one of their colors already. So cards like Cloudblazer, Unlicensed Disintegration, Restoration Gearsmith, these are the kind of cards that you're just frequently going to want in your deck when you're one of those 2 colors. So splashing them makes a lot of sense. It also has good fixing, especially in green, and Prophetic Prism is just such a good card. Like, this card's probably underrated, even though people are starting to take it pretty high. So, splashing, real thing. Learning how to do it when it's appropriate. Going back to when it's appropriate, I have a good anecdote on this, which is testing for Pro Tour. Actually, the last 2 Pro Tour Hawaiis ago, Pro Tour Dark Ascension, I kept handing Ben Stark my deck and being like, well, would you splash this card? And he kept saying, like, yeah, I guess given these cards, I would splash this card. And he finally was like, why are you always splashing? This isn't a splashing format. And he like, watched my draft and was like, look, right there, you just took an off-color card over a card in your colors because it's more powerful, but this isn't a format where you're rewarded for doing that. Stop doing that. Stop splashing. The opposite is true in Kaladesh. If you can pick up the fixing, which oftentimes you'll be able to, or have a lot of artifacts in your deck, that's another thing. If 8 cards in your deck are colorless, then you could just get away with a worse mana base because you'll always be able to cast them. Splashing is good, and there's reasons to splash. Welding Sparks and Revoke Privileges are just good cards.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
There's a lot of reasons to splash in this format, and sometimes you can even get away with the double splash when you have like multiple Prophetic Prisms. Then they count for your red and green sources when you're splashing both red and green in your like black-white deck.
Yeah, it has to be the best mana fixer in the format.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not close.
Splashing is fun. You get to play sweet cards, and this is a format that knowing how to do it and when to do it is good.
Yeah, a couple other subtleties when it comes to splashing that came to mind. Time helps. We say it almost tongue-in-cheek, but, we'll often refer to, like, divination as my mana fixing, right? That's, 2 and a blue sorcery, draw 2 cards. And that's kind of a joke because it doesn't actually fix your mana. But drawing a bunch of cards, or even just being able to see a bunch of cards, meaning like, a card like Anticipate, 1 in a blue instant, look at the top 3 cards of your library, you can put one of them in your hand, the rest in the bottom. Those type of cards really do help you see those cards, those splash cards and or the colors. Also, things like looting can help because if you have the ability to draw a card then discard a card, you can either try to draw into your splash mana source, or you can just discard the card that's your splash card if you don't have those. So all of these little things can help up and help out, as well as being a control deck. A deck that is designed and hoping to go into the late game will just have more chances, more draw steps, more card draw to see those cards. So splashes do tend to fit more into the control decks rather than into the aggro decks, which need a much more specific curve, and you're paying a much steeper price for splashing, even if it is for a really good card like unlicensed disintegration, you may be better off just saying, my deck fundamentally is trying to play a 2-drop, a 3-drop, a 4-drop, a combat trick, a removal spell. Are you dead yet? If you're going to try to jam a couple of swamps or, God forbid, 3 swamps into your red-white deck to try to get that unlicensed disintegration in there, you may very well be better off just not doing that so that you can enable more consistent curves where you can apply pressure to your opponent, even though unlicensed disintegration is fantastic. Another thing that you touched on, Luis, that I wanted to follow up on was the 2 type of cards that I look for are cards that are good in the late game, like you said, and also cards that are good whenever. Right? Like unlicensed disintegration is a great example of a card that is good whenever you can cast it. You do not care. It's just, I want the ability to cast this. If I get lucky and draw the mana sources that I need by turn 4, hey, I might be able to take out their Pima Outrider and attack them with a bunch of stuff. But by the same stroke, if you wait until turn 10 and you finally find your red source for your splashed unlicensed disintegration, you're going to be very happy with that at that point. And so those are the type of cards I want, or the late game cards that you mentioned. The other one is make sure that you're careful. One of the things that Luis said at the beginning was, you want about 3 mana sources if you're going to splash, say, 1 to 2 cards, no double mana symbols. Well, I've seen people take this and stretch it out a little too far, where all of a sudden their mana base is creeping towards that devil's mana base, the 666, 6 islands, 6 swamps, 6 whatever. And, or maybe it ends up being 4 of something, but all of a sudden you're actually just playing another color. You've got 4 cards that you're trying to, air quotes, splash, while playing 5 lands of that color. Your deck is something different than dipping your toe in to, another color to try to get a powerful effect. The one other thing that I wanted to mention that will tend to draw me into splashing even more than just raw power level with some of the cards that we've mentioned, like a bomb or an unlicensed disintegration, a nearly unconditional removal spell, are cards that specifically shore up weaknesses in the deck that I'm running. Different color pairs can have hard time with certain types of permanents or permanently resolving, getting rid of certain types of cards. And if you can reach out and touch into another color that really helps shore up a weakness of your deck, then I do think that leads me much more towards it being worth going for a splash and taking on the extra risk of upsetting my mana base than maybe getting a better version of a card I've already got. For example, sticking with unlicensed disintegration, if I've already got a couple of hard removal spells, tidy conclusions or something like that, I view unlicensed disintegration as just a more efficient, better version of tidy conclusion, but they're very similar cards in the way that I expect them to play out if I'm splashing for the unlicensed disintegration. I'm probably not going to be able to cast it on turn 3. I'll probably be casting it around or maybe even a little later than I could cast tidy conclusion anyway. But that's because, both of these are black cards and they're similar purpose. But if I'm playing a deck that's, green-white or something like that, and I can reach out and get a removal spell of the quality of unlicensed disintegration, which,
like a Welding Sparks or something.
Yeah, like a Welding Sparks or something like that I wouldn't be able to, in these colors very often, be able to just reach out, remove your blocker with my Welding Sparks and attack you with a bunch of stuff. I'm leaning on these fight cards or, maybe something very specific, like a revoke privileges or whatever. But it gives me this other option to be able to do this that I'm more willing to reach out and go for a splash. So those are just some of the finer point type stuff, to back up what Luis said about splashing in general. One more thing I wanted to talk about, Luis, before we wrap up the show. Or Kaladesh, I just wanted to touch base with you because you and I had kind of had a beginnings of a conversation about this, and we seem to be on a similar page. And I thought, well, let's just have this conversation on the podcast instead. But there's a big gap in how a lot of these decks are played out.
Do I have to remove all the monkey jokes from the podcast conversation? Because those literally are actual normal conversations.
Yeah, well, yes, you do. You have to filter out the monkey jokes for this very serious Kaladesh conversation. But, I've noticed that these decks are playing out in significantly different ways from each other. We usually tend to think of things in Magic and specifically in Limited on a spectrum of hyper aggressive all the way to super controlling. And there's a lot of baggage that comes with each of those terms. But, I think we know what we're talking about when we talk about a very aggressive deck versus a very slow controlling deck. And it does feel like most of the time in limited, most decks end up being somewhere in the middle and kind of masquerade with the right draws as one or the other. But it does feel in Kaladesh that like people are starting to really push the boundaries on how fast the deck can be. And then on top of that, a lot of the cards seem to incentivize you to try to build for the long game.
So the best example of this is Renegade Freighter. And I know we've used this example before, but it's a good one.
Yeah.
It's a great card. It's one of the better commons. I mean, some people argue for like a couple commons over it, Welding Sparks or whatever. But the point is, Renegade Freighter is still a premium common. Some decks just do not want to put it in their deck. It's a colorless card. They do not want it in their deck. They would rather have, a 2-mana 1/3 over Renegade Freighter, and that is actually a really good example of what the different decks are trying to do in this format. Because some decks are all about playing Prophetic Prisms and decoction modules and sitting there and buying time and then assembling some kind of absurd combo or crushing their opponent in the late game with very powerful synergies. And other decks are like playing Thriving Grubs into Renegade Freighters and playing 15 lands. And I have not seen very many formats where that delineation is so wide, where you have these decks with such divergent game plans. Like, look, every format has aggro and control decks, and some are most, Curve is more important. Like Origins is the classic example from the last couple of years of like, yeah, this format is a lot about 2-drops, and the fancy stuff doesn't really work very well. Whereas Shadows of Innistrad and Eldritch Moon had a lot of nonsense going on, and there were beatdown decks, but the beatdown decks weren't quite as aggressive as maybe some other formats. In Kaladesh, you have both. You somehow have these nonsense decks that are playing Panharmonicons and are trying to Wispweaver Angel their Restoration Gearsmiths or what have you. And you have decks that are playing Night Market Lookout and Skyskiff and Reckless Embermage or Reckless Fireweaver, rather, the 1/3 for 2 that pings your opponent when you play an artifact, and they're just trying to beat their opponent down completely. And what that means is that regardless of which deck you're playing, you kind of need to respect the other half of the format. Or not even half, because I don't really know what the actual breakdown is. It's probably not 50-50. It's probably more tilted towards aggro, but you have to respect what the other side of the format is trying to do.
Yeah, and that's really the key here, right? Like, what's the takeaway? Okay, so you and I are like, wow, this format seems to be pretty polarized, but why do we care, right? And the reason we care is because if you're going to play on one side or the other, you have to respect that you may face down a deck that's looking to do something very different from what you're doing.
Right. It's less of a concern with aggro, actually, because aggro, its game plan is pretty focused, and you're trying to curve out with 1, 2, 3, and 4 drops and some vehicles and just run your opponent over. And that kind of doesn't care what it's facing down against. With control decks or the nonsense decks, whatever you want to call them, because it's not even always control in the strictest sense. It's sometimes just more of these heavy synergy decks that are trying to set up engines. Mm-hmm. They do need to respect Renegade Freighter. They do need to know that sometimes Windrake is a card, and you have to play some cards that keep you alive. You can't just play nothing into your fabrication module and then hope to start going off after that, or just kind of dirtle around and play Tezzeret's Ambition and just get run over, or play a Cal Prowler or what have you. You do need cheap cards. You do need cards that affect the board, and it's important to make sure you know that, yes, in some matchups, you're going to have a defensive card and it's going to look so bad to you because your opponent's just trying to assemble a Whirler Virtuoso combo, and you're just why do I even have this card in my deck? Like, I have these early blockers I'm supposed to interact, and my opponent's just going right over the top. So when you're in those situations, you do have to know, how do you sideboard into a deck that faces well against your opponent's deck, and that's why sideboard cards are really important. And also, if you are playing one of these long game decks, make sure your long game's actually good. It doesn't really do you any favors if you're I'm this go wide, or this go long synergy deck, and then your opponent's yeah, I am too, but my engine's just way better than yours.
Yeah, I found that situation a couple of times already, and that's where the card we opened in the Cracker Pack, the Durable Handicraft, tends to fall a bit short, right? If somebody else gets their engine set up and your engine is Durable Handicraft, they are often going to just go over the top of you. Yeah,
and Durable Handicraft is not beating an aggro deck.
No.
So where does this fit?
Right. It's like it's kind of the crappy build around, right? And,
Yeah.
and that is one of the things that, you and I have talked about on the show and we'll continue to dissect. And I think that by the end of the format, after you let me draft it a bunch more times, I'll have a really good sense for which are the decks that I really want to go for. Is it the energy deck? Is it the modules, deck? Is it the blink deck? Is it the 4-color green deck? Which one of these are the ones that I'm very much like, no, this deck absolutely has what it takes to win most matchups, outside of something insane. And that's where I want to be. Or is it like, yeah, you can get a bunch of energy, but maybe the payoffs just aren't quite there unless you open a very specific rare or something like that. These are the questions, that I want to answer. But in the meantime, when I am exploring and pushing in different directions with these, if I am on that side of the coin, on the slower, engine side of the coin, I want to remember defensive speed, the concept of playing cards that affect the board in the early stages of the game so that you don't get overwhelmed and that it gives you a chance to actually push yourself into that long game where you can take advantage. If you dedicate all of your picks and your whole build towards setting up your engine or whatever, that often means you're playing a lot of cards that don't affect the board, either in the early stages or even in the mid part of the game. You slam your Panharmonicon after playing your Prophetic Prism, and you could take a ton of damage in this format. So you have to make sure that you're respecting the fact that you absolutely could be up against a deck that is going to be playing cards like you mentioned, Renegade Freighter, or one of the more popular decks that I've seen rise up is the Go Wide deck, the Inspired Charge based deck where they're just playing like a bunch of Fabricate creatures and small creatures, and then they just turn them all sideways. And if the more cards you have that don't block, attack, remove a creature, or affect the board, the more chance they have to just run you over in the early game. So finding that balance is going to be really key. The other thing I wanted to mention that I thought was really good that you brought up was sideboarding, not just silver bullet sideboard cards, but like you said, sometimes you do say, okay, I'm going to play a couple of mediocre 2-drops just to make sure that I can block or interact with my opponent in case they're trying to run me over. Then you play against the person who's trying to assemble the nonsense stuff that we've been talking about. You want those cards out of your deck. You know that. But how can you transform your deck just to be more effective against that person? That means sometimes bringing in 2-1s for 2, curio vendors and Sage of Shayla's Claims, even if you don't really have anything going on with, with energy or whatever. And you sometimes do have to transform the way your deck looks to try to maximize a matchup if somebody's pushing into one of these extremes. You also can bring in cards that you normally wouldn't want to bring in or even play in your deck, as long as they're early drops that can affect the board. You can play a lot of those type of cards. And, 1-1s for 1 and that kind of thing that can trade off, with your opponent's early drops or affect the board in the early stages to give you a better chance of getting to the late game. Okay, so that's it. I just wanted to touch base on that because I thought that was kind of an interesting development from Kaladesh, but we'll see as we move forward. Again, we'll, of course, be keeping you updated on our thoughts on the format and which direction things go. The big question marks for me is which are the I know the aggro decks are good. I've played them. I know that those can do what they're trying to do. The big question for me is, again, which of the go deep decks are the ones that are the premium, the ones I really want to go for, and I feel very confident if I get a decent version of that, they have a really good chance to win, and which are the ones that are a little more variable and dependent on certain cards, and of course, which ones are kind of not worth it. So keep an eye on that as we go. All right, that's going to do it for the show this week. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. Of course, you can always send us feedback to our email address, lr@lrcast.com. I did want to thank everybody for filling out that survey again. We find that interesting. It does help us craft and shape the show's content from a sort of baseline perspective. So thank you for doing that. I also want to thank our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com. If you want to head over to CFB, you can find everything you need Magic related, including sealed product, singles, and even free content over there that I mentioned earlier. Make sure you do check it out. Awesome stuff. If you play Constructed, you're going to find a lot of great stuff over there as well at ChannelFireball.com. That is going to do it for the show this week. We want to thank you for hanging out, and we will talk to you next week.
So today I've got the official, mind you, this is official. Basically,
you got something official and a sign-off?
Official. So sometimes official things have to go in sign-offs. Just
right, so what is this? What is the official thing we're talking about?
This is the official basic land power rankings.
Oh my God!
See, this is not a trivial topic. So when you choose your constructed deck, you have to choose what basic lands to play. And there is a range, trust me. And this was prompted because our most recent Pro Tour champion, Shota Yasuoka, plays with all Guru lands, except he didn't bring mountains, so he had Landbox Mountains and Guru Islands and Swamps.
Which we, of course, made sure to point out on the air.
That was a travesty, obviously.
Yeah.
But that prompted me to just put out the definitive guide to the basic land power rankings so that people would know what are the correct, objectively.
Wow. You are taking on quite a task here, my friend. All right, I'm listening.
All right, well, let's start from the top. Guru is actually the best. These are very difficult to acquire, but they look very cool. They look very different from almost every other land you could play. And the Guru lands are clearly dominate the power rankings. So they
are gorgeous in real life if you've seen them too. They are absolutely stunning. They're also like a few $100s each.
Oh, they're obscene. And one of my
they still just tap for blue.
I used to have a bunch of them, and I just sold them off for much less than what they're worth now.
Oh, no.
Have no fear. The ones I use are up next. These are second only to Guru. These are beta lands.
Yeah, that's
beta lands look awesome. They're creeping up in value, but really they're not that expensive. Like you can get beat beta lands for a couple bucks each, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They look great. Beta lands are very high in the power rankings. I actually don't like alpha, but they count as beta. I will begrudgingly admit that if you use alpha lands.
Okay.
Next up are the APAC and Euro lands. These are the promotional arena lands that are actually modeled after real places, and they look very cool. There's a lot of different versions of them, but they all are tied for third in the power rankings here.
Okay.
And you'll see some players who always use these. Very important though to not mix and match. If you're going to use them, you make sure you're using all the ones from the same set.
I'm going to let you save it for a different sign off, but we should talk about which are the best beta lands at some point. Anyway.
It's the darker ones, but anyway.
I digress.
Next up is the original arena lands. So these are the ones that have like you can see a little like sea serpent in them, like in the island. And these all look very similar to each other, so they have a very distinct, visual style. You definitely cannot mix and match with these either. And the arena ones look great. I use these sometimes too. So those are fourth in the power rankings. Now we're moving to the bottom half, and these are the ones you get dinged points for using. So if you don't have access to Guru, Beta, APAC, Arena, have no fear. If you just play with all Tempest lands or all Invasion lands or just all lands of the same set, they're going to look pretty good. Yeah, Magic art is beautiful and the lands look good. However, there are some which you are deducted points for. The first up is Revised. So these are white border revised lands. If you use these, you will be penalized.
I'll probably mention it on camera too if you're at a tournament.
Oh yeah. Next up are Landbox, and this is a common Pro Tour favorite of it's time to play Constructed. Better to go to the Landbox, grab 4 islands and 3 mountains and 2 forests for my teamer deck. Below even Landbox, because remember we're going top down. Landbox parentheses not matching. You didn't even take the time to get the same picture. You just have like a mismatched jumble of. You obviously just like
that's
grab them
maximum laziness.
Just on the way to your match, like come on, just have a little respect.
Yeah, come on.
And the bottom of the power rankings, this is going to be probably an uncontroversial choice. The full art Zendikar lands, old or new.
Those are the worst.
Power rankings are over.
Wow. Oh, man.